Um, it's a very heady afternoon. And it is great to introduce our final speaker of the Experimental Curators Hub 2025, Justine Ludwig. Justine is a curator and writer who currently serves as the executive director of Creative Time, New York's vanguard public organization. Since 1974, Creative Time has commissioned and presented ambitious public art projects with thousands of artists. Previously held curatorial positions for Justine include the Contemporary Arts Center in Cincinnati and Dallas Contemporary. Justine has curated projects with many artists, including Shilpa Gupta, Nadia Kabi-Linke, Pedro Reyes, Paula Pivi, and Pia Camille. Her research interests include the intersections of aesthetics and violence, economics and globalization. Ludwig has an MA in Global Arts from Goldsmiths University of London and a BA in Art with a concentration in Art History from Colby College. Thank you for being with us, Justine.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. First, an expression of gratitude. Priyanka, Pratik, this is a bucket list event for me. So I am so honored and really emotional to be here after being such a fan of this program for so long. To the amazing Experimenter team, I've adored getting to spend time with you. It's been such a joy. To all of you for being here, being present, being engaged in the way that you have been the last 2 days, I'm really inspired by it. It's given me so much life. And to the other curators who are part of the hub, having my name uttered next to yours is such a privilege. I feel so lucky. And Ratad, you are an unbelievable moderator. I feel in very good hands and very grateful. So thank you all so much. I think we're all deeply in our head right now. I am. So maybe we take a second and shake it out, stretch our neck a little bit, move around so we can stay present for the next hour. And then there's tea and conversation. So, yeah. So I want to start maybe with a little vulnerability. I had a totally different presentation that I had handed off. And then yesterday happened, and I thought, maybe I need to rethink this. Maybe I need to talk about curatorial practice in a different way, who I am, how I exist in the world. And this is actually a very vulnerable thing for me, because I usually sit as a representative of the institution that I serve, because I really think of curating as an institutional curator as a service role. But I'm trying to show up today as me, and that's a very strange and disorienting and vulnerable thing. So bear with me as I talk about some things that maybe I haven't spoken about before or I'm talking about in a different way. And I wanted to start with this. No condition is permanent. It is a note that I have on my desk, and it's been sitting on my desk for years. It is this notion that when we are in crisis, there will be another crisis. The condition is not permanent. That the work that we do exists, it might serve as catalyst, but it is not permanent, nor are we permanent. And it's something that really roots me and I found to be profoundly liberating as a grounding thing whenever I'm thinking through my work. So talking about being a curator and myself sitting in that place is a profoundly disorienting thing. And I think that in some ways it's a cop-out that I often talk as an institution, not myself. Because for me, often success in its greatest form is when I disappear. When you do not see my curatorial hand, when it is the message of the artist or the community that's being seen more directly, I cease to exist. And that is something that I find profoundly liberating. So sitting here and talking in this way is very difficult for me. And then at the same time, I really work with this tension between center and periphery. I've worked in a few different curatorial contexts. None of those places are where I am from, where I grew up. And so a lot of my energy has really gone into becoming actively part of that community and engaging with it. So something I've never really spoken about before, excuse me as I struggle with technology, is that I really started my curatorial career as part of an artist collective called CS13 that was founded in Cincinnati, Ohio, that existed for a very brief period of time, 2009 to 2011, with this beautiful group of human beings, many of whom I have not seen in many years, and many of us who are doing radically different things from the arts. But we worked on this collective practice where every month, can you not hear me well? Okay. Excuse me. Is that better? Okay. Where every month we pooled what little money we had together to make shows happen, often completely wild ideas, in abandoned spaces, in unexpected locations, in the over-the-Rhine neighborhood of Cincinnati, Ohio. This project here is one of the buildings that we used, and it's a piece by Mark Harris, and I use it often internally, not publicly, as an exercise, because so often our work is based on fantasies, that it is this romance, this vision of another world that we so deeply invest in. Two examples of projects that we've done at CS13 that really grounded my practice, and I want to note I am not the curatorial author of these projects. It is other individuals of the collective that did this together. The first is Courses, which was a series of dinners, like cooking workshops and lectures. So members of the community would come together and cook over a lecture. So it was a course and a course. So you're getting food and you're learning something simultaneously. So we transformed the gallery into a functional kitchen. It was open to the public. People would come in and out, get food, and be part of the conversation. Then another project, Oral Grid, where we had musicians standing on the roofs of buildings throughout this neighborhood. And the idea was you could walk this grid and you would experience the music in different ways or run through that space. And I think this kind of working and thinking made me really fall in love with working in public space and thinking about what public art could be in a different way. Now, going to sort of part of that tension between center and periphery was at the same time that I was part of this collective. I was the curator at the Contemporary Art Center in the town, which is this unbelievable Zaha Hadid building. It has this fantastic history, a really important place within, I think, global art history in many ways. The Robert Mapplethorpe controversy that was so formational really hit a head at that institution. And so I was an institutional curator serving in a center role while also being in this DIY space, like punk mentality simultaneously, which led to this like really deep internal tension and something that I still struggle with. Like being the institution, still being like, come on, I'm punk, I'm counterculture, and the tension that exists there. So one of my projects that really formed me was this exhibition with Shilpa Gupta called A Bit Closer that I worked on in 2010 with her. Speaking of disappearing, that's me in 2010 that you're seeing in the back of my head. But one of the most central projects from that exhibition was I Want to Live with No Fear, which we gave out thousands of these oversized balloons to the community. So they originated at the Contemporary Art Center and found their way throughout the entire city. So in 2009, the Over-the-Rhine neighborhood was listed as the most dangerous zip code in America. A report came out that said that if you lived in that zip code, you had a 1 in 4 chance of being a victim of violence. That is heavily disputed by members of the community, how the statistics were reached, how that was reached, but that really affected people that lived there. And so this sort of statement, this claim of I want to live with no fear became a very personal sort of declaration for people in the neighborhood. And I lived in that neighborhood at the time. And it was such a moving experience walking from this project to my home and seeing my walk flooded with people holding these balloons. And this sort of shared humanity and moment of this desire. We all deserve to live without fear. We deserve to live in a space of care, understanding, seeing one another in these moments of fear, these moments of danger. And it really shaped me as a human, as a curator, to see the kinds of conversations that this work could trigger and the way it would really lead to a sense of belonging for people. I still get messages from individuals that are saying, oh, I have the balloon still. It's deflated, it's yellowed, but I can't get rid of it. because of what it symbolizes and the fact that I turn to it over and over and over again. And that sort of echoing, the fact that the project, that dispersal has disappeared, but the impact remains, the ghost of it remains, is something that I carry with me every day. Another thing that I found when I went back through my practice is this notion of iteration. I tend to work with artists over and over again. I basically get into a creative relationship with somebody and we just can't quit each other. There are new things that we want to explore, different contexts. And I also work with these artists in different places. So thinking about how their work means something different in radically different contexts. So thinking about how you orient the artist's practice in space from where they are based, the work that they're doing, and then what it means to bring it to a different community and a different public. So here you have two shows that I did with the artist Pia Camille. One in Cincinnati, Ohio. You see that beautiful, iconic Zaha Hadid architecture. And then the other at Dallas Contemporary, where I served as the deputy director and chief curator. And these are two different shows that were really based in locality. These are new works, another echoing of a lot of the curators. I'm also a commissioning curator. I really like supporting artists in making new work, especially site-specific work that deals directly with community. So the work that you see at the CAC dealt with markets, economies, and the fashion industry. Macy's was based in Cincinnati, Ohio. A lot of people who were doing merchandising were based in that city, so we were looking specifically at industry that was happening there. And then Bara 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 was about the porosity of borders and economies. So Pia in this project was looking specifically at the relationship between the economy of Mexico and that of the United States. That these were all t-shirts that were originally made in Latin America for US-based organizations. So a lot of them have political or social affiliations noted on them. So they'd be sent to the United States. Then they'd end up in thrift stores. No one could sell them. So then they get shipped to Mexico, where they were sold in markets. And then Pia bought them and brought them back into the United States as an artwork. So this act of transformation, this economy, the transformation that happens across that border and how these borders are actually porous and invented in many ways. Then two projects with Laercio Redondo, one at MA in Rio, which is where Laercio is based, and the other at Dallas Contemporary. In the context of MA, the work was really about the history of modernism and architecture in that city. And in the context of Dallas, the show was about how the city had used architecture to present itself as a modern, forward-looking society, an aspirational society. So it led to conversations about how we were dealing with the reinvention of our city. Then two projects with Paula Peavy, MAM at Dallas Contemporary, Art with a View at the Bass Museum of Art in Miami. Here you see a fighter jet. It's an actual fighter jet, upside down, looking at issues around the military-industrial complex, and also the way that we deal with gender in childhood, that this piece became a toy, thinking about how kids play with these symbols of violence, often young boys do, and sort of the audacity of turning this fighter jet into a toy. And then this notion of playfulness, also with these bears, and then two brand new commissions that you see at the Bass. The top one, those are mattresses. It's a giant bed. You get into it and all be in conversation with one another. And the piece on the bottom is called Lies. These are all images of reality over which there are voices that are telling you things that are obvious lies. And then not so obvious lies. And talking about this post-truth reality that we live in and how often it's difficult to discern what is real and what is not. And if something is said with authority, if you're told, it never rains in India, even if it's pouring outside, maybe you'll believe it if somebody says it with just enough authority. Now to my work currently. Creative Time, as was mentioned, is an over 50-year organization that's been based in New York City. It is a public organization and it is a socially engaged organization. We are focused on working with contemporary artists to realize dream projects that address the most pressing issues of the now. We have this new catchphrase, so I'm trying it out a little bit. art that meets the moment, the notion that art is rooted in the now, the political realities of the moment in which we are showing it. Often we think of success as if the work was not as relevant if it happened in 5 years or 5 years ago, that's a failure. That it needs to be of the time. That's part of also why the work is temporary. It allows us to be really rooted in the moment in which it is created. And it is also art that only really exists with the interaction of the public. I think about it as public art that privileges the public, not just art that happens to be outside. Often our projects are in fact indoors. And I really came to this because I've thought about art serving as both burn and balm, especially when working in a political space. That it can really get the attention of a public, that it can get people worked up, that they can see the injustices, the cruelties of society. That is the burn. And the balm is that it can heal, that it can create sites of discourse, sites of community, sites of healing through its work. And often our projects are thought about sort of in that binary, in that interaction. So I'm going to talk about 2 projects that I've worked on. I also want to note, all of this is collective process. So I work with a team. These projects would not happen if it wasn't for the entire team. We have a production group that really helps make the work with each artist. We have an unbelievable curatorial team that drives discourse around each project. We have an amazing fundraising team that makes sure that people understand why we're doing and what we're doing it, a communications team. So this is really a collective curatorial process. And I want to start with talking about Jill Magid, who's getting a lot of airtime here between Anne and I. The project that Jill actually did at Art in General was so formative for me, so it's really such a privilege to get to speak the same day as Anne on that project. I'd been wanting to work with Jill for many, many years, and when I started at Creative Time, she was one of the first phone calls I made, and I said, I finally found the context in which we're going to work together. I'm running an organization where I get to start with the provocation, what is your dream project that nobody else is crazy enough to take on? I'm like, this is a Jill Magid question. And so for a few years, we started cooking up all these ideas, and we came up with something that was really exciting, and we were going down that path, and then the pandemic hit. And I was going to essentially break up with Jill and say, I'm sorry, the world is upside down. We cannot work on what we were working on before. It's not relevant in this moment. We don't know where society is going. We don't know what's happening. So either, we say, it was nice working together, see you down the line, or we rethink things. And she came up in real time with this project. And she said, we're in a moment of crisis. I'm paraphrasing, and it's recorded, so this is dangerous. But she said, we're in this moment of crisis and loss, and we don't know how to deal with loss right now. We're in isolation. We don't have spaces to mourn collectively. We don't have community to deal with this loss. Let's think about how we memorialize the COVID pandemic in real time. And she came to this idea of the penny. So the penny is a symbol in the United States of wishes. You throw them into wells, they're aspirational, the material is of more value than the penny itself. They're about to be discontinued actually in the United States, but that's a new thing. So if you find any, they're about to become collector's items. So she was really interested in the sort of symbolic nature of the penny. And she was also interested in the fact that the United States actually frames them as a public art commission. If you go onto the website of the government, they say who the artists are behind it. They say how it's, it's written up like a piece of wall text, essentially. And so Jill was fascinated by the fact that this was really seen as diffuse public art. So what we did is we engraved on the edges of 120,000 newly minted 2020 pennies the text, "The body was already so fragile." The project is called Tender, dealing with legal tender, but also tenderness. And the 120,000 equates the amount of a single stimulus check, which was sent out to individuals in the United States that made it under a certain level of income. And so the idea was referencing this financial gift, support that we were given, the inability to support one another in this time, the loss, And the phrase, "the body was already so fragile," was taken from a text about the economic toll of the pandemic, not the human toll. So often the conflation between the loss of lives and the loss of money, and also how the loss of money led to the loss of lives, and the challenge with that. So these were dispersed into the US economy through bodegas, our little local stores that we all had, one of the few businesses that really stayed open in New York throughout the pandemic while we were in lockdown. Also, one of the few businesses that really takes cash and functions on cash. So these pennies became part of the economy. And they spread, much like the virus. New York was an epicenter. We watched these pennies leave New York, find their way across the country, find their way into other countries. We got some strange messages from people finding them in their pockets, not knowing what they were, forums asking, what are these pennies with these alterations? And then Jill made a film about it called Tender Presence, which was a memorial space. We presented it in an abandoned bank in Williamsburg to further reference this tension between loss. When you walked in, you were confronted by these flowers bought from local bodegas that also served a memorial function. Then you'd enter the space, this dilapidated bank, and musicians played a live score for this film. So once again, an active iteration, the Tender Project becoming Tender Presence. Then I want to talk very briefly about Charles Gaines, which is a project that has changed my life. It is a many year project that I inherited. When I started at Creative Time, I said, what are the projects that people pitched to us that we couldn't make happen? I'm sure there are a lot of them. And I was reading all those different proposals, and I read Charles Gaines's proposal for Moving Chains, and I said, I need to live in a world in which this project happens. And so I asked Charles, I know this project was canceled, but can we make it happen? And he stood up, gave me a hug, and whispered in my ear, do not let me down. And if that man ever tells you, do not let me down, you will not let him down. I hope you all have the privilege of meeting him one day, but he's a personal hero and a brilliant artist. And so we did this massive project with him called the American Manifest. And this project was done in collaboration with Jean Cooney at Times Square Arts and Meredith Johnson at Governor's Island, and it would not have happened without them. So the first part is Manifestos 4, which was presented in the middle of Times Square. It was a musical performance of the Dred and Harriet Scott decision, which was a Supreme Court decision made in 1857 that Dred Scott was suing for his right to be a US citizen, and essentially, as a former enslaved person, that was shot down. And basically saying he is not a full human being. He and his wife do not have the right to this. And so that was transposed into music with the text showing behind it as musicians played it, and then Frederick Douglass's rebuttal was sung. These trees, this piece called Roots, also shown in the middle of Times Square. These are sweet gum trees. They're actual trees ripped from the ground with their roots exposed. This notion that our history is often underground, we don't see it, but it's our roots, it's where we come from, and we need to acknowledge that we can't hide it, we can't ignore it. If we cut off the roots, the tree doesn't grow. It's really inverting that, and we're in a moment in the United States where we are denying history. And from talking to many people over the last 2 days, it sounds like there's a similar thing happening right now in India, that we are erasing our history books, that we're retelling it in a different way, but we cannot deny the past. And if we don't learn from it, if we don't acknowledge it, we're doomed to repeating it. But the central part of this project is Moving Chains, which is a 110-foot long kinetic sculpture reminiscent of the hull of a ship. You walk through it, and overhead there are these 9 giant moving chains, and the piece rattles. You feel the chains moving in your body. Your body becomes a percussive instrument. It becomes an embodied experience. And this work is addressing legacies of forced migration in the United States. And this site is very specific. In order to get there, you need to take a ferry to Governor's Island. It's this experience of being destabilized. So you come to the island already having this experience of having been on the waterways, of not quite having your footing. And then you walk to this piece, and you come to this work, already destabilized, already moving with the course of the water moving around you. And at the same time, you have these chains moving at the same rate. And so you become part of the work. The piece took a decade, as I said, so here are a few different iterations of what it looked like before we got to the final design. And then another image of above. And part of why this piece is so specific and exciting is not just the fact that you take a boat to get there, but that you have a view of the Statue of Liberty, a fraught symbol of freedom for many individuals. And you also have a perfect view of Lower Manhattan, where the slave market was located in New York. And something that often happens in the United States is that people say slavery is the history of the South, not the North, and that is not true. And so it is this moment of reforming where we stand, a moment of reorientation, and our own complicity in these histories, and our need to own them, our need to acknowledge them. And then very briefly, I think of curating as a practice. It is something that we are always in practice. We're always learning. It is a site of vulnerability. And I also really love curatorial practice because I believe that it leads to profound intimacies like the one we're actually having right now in community. And a lot of our work at Creative Time is really based in thought leadership. We have the Summit, which is a biennial conference, which is about the intersection of art and activism. This is an image from the last one, which was curated by our brilliant curator, Creative Time Diavij, along with Anna Harshani and Gervais Marsh, with a really wonderful group of advisors. An image of our think tank project, which we did during the pandemic because we had funding for the summit, but realized we couldn't do the summit, so we needed to reorient in that moment. And so we really looked at the field and we thought about better practices that we could engage in as a curatorial field. There's a website for it, so you can look at these scores that we came up with, looking at transparent budgeting practices, looking at land taxes and ways to support indigenous communities, thinking about rest. And then in 2023, we opened a space. This is not an exhibition space. It is a programming space. We do programming every week, and it is about holding community. It is about hospitality. We serve food. We gather around one long table and engage in discussions about the political realities and needs of the now. And it is constantly shifting. It is constantly growing. These are images from our first birthday party. We had a ventriloquist and a clown, so it's also a place for joy and humor, because it's important when you're doing hard work to also remember that we have to be joyous, that we have to find spaces to laugh and care for one another, enjoy some sweets, as we have been doing here as well. And I want to end with something I also think about, especially during challenging times. I believe that art holds us in our humanity, that it reminds us of the challenges of the now, the past, and the future, and also allows us to practice a future that perhaps we hope to be a part of, that allows us to imagine beyond ourselves. And it is a beautiful and hopeful and audacious space that we all have the privilege of engaging with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justine. Like many of Creative Time's projects, that presentation gave me goosebumps. I really, we're all very grateful to you for opening up with us in this way, for this vulnerability that you have put forward, and in thinking about your path through this incredible set of projects that you presented us with, and many more that you haven't spoken about. But I wanted to perhaps think with you something that struck me in Creative Time's own sort of self-description as a vanguard organization, is what that term really does and what it can still do in this moment. This dream of the kind of coming together of art and life, art and society, the kind of aspiration towards some kind of change that art can make, that it can hold us in our humanity, that it can produce perhaps an affective condition that shifts something. And so, yeah, I wanted to think with you and ask you to perhaps share with us where that resonates with you still in in a time that is so incredibly fraught, and where there has been kind of an incredible effort on the part of many, many people in power, and through structures, legal structures, and other ways to put up those walls again, to create those divisions, and to kind of, and for institutions as well to sort of recede into their four walls, rather than really take up the challenge of continuing to be in this incredibly difficult public space.
Yeah, I want to answer that from the perspective of past, present, future, perhaps. Interestingly enough, Creative Time was founded in a specific spirit, a similar spirit to Printed Matter, which Charmony started talking about, and also to art in general. These artist-centered, radical spaces that were embracing practices that really didn't have other platforms within the spirit of New York City. We were founded in a New York that had a lot of abandoned space on the verge of bankruptcy, and it was this effort to really place artists at the center of civic life, that they were taking over parts of Lower Manhattan that essentially were completely barren, and so thinking about how artists could rethink space and take over these empty spaces. And so this notion of art holding space and rethinking what a city can look like and what it can be like is our history. What I think is really wonderful about the organization is that it's truly nimble. It has transformed time and time again. I like saying that we are ever reforming to fit the contours of an ever-changing world, that we're able to really respond, that public art, that social engagement has looked different over the last 50 years, and that's something that's rooted in both our past, present, and future. And what I like about our work is that we live in a dream space. And I think that is the radicality that we really own, that we take on things that we were told were impossible. And I think a lot of the members of the team are gluttons for punishment, in that we say, oh, that's impossible, that can't be done, let's go. And this notion of let's make that happen, and that spirit of embracing impossibility is really rooted in who we are as an organization.
Thank you. And perhaps also to then take you back through your journey again as a curator and now being a director, the manner in which you spoke about accompanying artists on these journeys, working with them over and over again. I wondered in this capacity as director, there are many other responsibilities, and you spoke about that at the very beginning of your presentation. And how do you? I mean, you talked also about how all of these projects are produced as a collective curatorial undertaking. And so within the structure of this organization, how does that actually work? Where do projects emerge from? How do you accompany artists on that journey? And how do you as a director see yourself also as enabling the different parts of this very important collaboration that happens internally?
Yeah, I don't curate the way that I used to. There's a curatorial team that's led by Dia, that has Anna, that has Gervais on it, that they are driving curatorial visioning and programming right now. And a lot of my role is fundraising, is engaging with the board, is thinking about governance, is thinking about the function of our organization on a daily basis. And I've tried to reframe that as a creative practice, which has been an interesting mental exercise and a challenge in many ways, but also profoundly rewarding, because I feel like I get to go around and preach the gospel of Creative Time. Have you heard the good word, what we are doing, and bringing people into the fold to engage with our thinking, and being able to create space for radicality where I think there is less and less, especially within the United States in this moment, and being able to do that from what many people see as the center, from New York, has been a really beautiful and meaningful experience.
And that also makes me want to ask about whether there have been discussions ever about thinking of Creative Times work outside of New York. The summit, I feel like, is a really significant opportunity to engage with many different kinds of ideas coming from different parts of the world and also different parts of the US. And so just to even talk about what it means for an organization that, as you described, was born so much out of this moment of alternative art spaces and a history of a city that was going through a certain kind of crisis when it came up, both kind of taking that and thinking about what that model might mean for other places, but also, since I brought up this question of Creative Times history, how the city that it was born in has changed so dramatically, even just in terms of the kind of gentrification and the kind of construction and displacement of publics and spaces that have happened so aggressively in the last 3 decades, if not longer, and how that has perhaps fundamentally challenged something about Creative Times' existence, because the priors, what it was based on, have really been the ground has been, the rug has been pulled out from under you in some ways, and yet you keep going. So yeah, maybe just to talk about those.
So our mission doesn't ground us in New York, which is interesting. So that's where we're based, but we actually can do projects anywhere. And we've done, really what we're obligated to is site specificity. And so you've seen that in some of our projects like Waiting for Godot in New Orleans, which was a Paul Chan project curated by Nato Thompson that happened in New Orleans in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. It was a restaging of Samuel Beckett's play Waiting for Godot and thinking about what that piece meant in the context of New Orleans at that moment. Charles Gaines's project is going to Cincinnati, Ohio, and it's happening there because the Ohio River, that line between Kentucky and Cincinnati, is where the most enslaved people traveled to freedom. Though when they crossed the Ohio, the reality of what freedom looked like was not quite the freedom that I think they were all promised. And so citing it there becomes a different kind of conversation. And we have other projects that are cited in different places that are traveling, but really still rooted in that site specificity. So that's something that's important to us. It's been challenging because a lot of spaces in New York City that people think are public are in fact private space. And so dealing with that tension is very real. And finding ways to cite our work in interesting spaces where histories sort of emerge and are elevated has become harder because you're not finding a lot of abandoned space that's easily accessible to general publics, where you can take the subway, that our ADA, all these things that we really need to make sure. And so that's shifted also a lot of our thinking. So for example, the Dime Savings Bank in Williamsburg, where we had Jill's tender presence, that was a rare find in a very centrally located space, very easy to go to. But other times, we have to think creatively. We have an upcoming project with Chloe Bass that's going to be in the MTA, in the subway system. Diffuse, it's a sound piece. We have other projects that have happened, in collaboration with developers, and it's really hard to, say that, public art is always part of gentrification and changing, landscapes of the city. That is the reality. And so thinking about ways that we can do that with intention has also been really important. And often it's these abandoned lots throughout the city of New York that we activate, or these spaces that are in transition that are under ownership. They're not city sites. And there's a lot more freedom often in those spaces than spaces that are governed by the government too. That often those collaborations lead to some more openness and more challenging statements being made, which has been quite interesting to see as well.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the world as unfair.
That is exactly what I was thinking about.
Yeah, but I will open it up to the room because we only have a few minutes left. We have a hand up here. And there's, okay, so we'll take one question from the room and then we'll take the online question.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Perfect. Hi, Justine. Thank you. I'm Shivansh, but thank you so much for opening up this part of your.
Is it working? Yeah.
Yeah, this part of your practice for us. It was lovely hearing more about being very artist centric in a way where you're like, tell us your biggest dream and we'll try and make it happen. And considering that it is a public organization, there is a lot of responsibilities for the public too, in terms of every artist has a dream, and which artist do you grant that wish to and go forward. I would love to know more about what that looks like, and also what are questions the public can hold you accountable with, because it's an organization that's public. You have those guide rails. I'd love to know more, because that's a discourse I'd love to start getting into.
Yeah. So to rephrase, you're asking first how we select the artists that we work with and what that process looks like.
How you select, but more in the sense of from the your responsibility to the public for the impact of the artwork. It's not how you select the artist, it's just like what guide rails are there with respect to what you choose to show or support.
So it is impossible to be beholden to every single individual in a public. I think that's often this challenge that we face when we're talking about community, audience, publics more broadly, this notion that we need to check the boxes for everybody. That is impossible. I think also if you're creating projects that everyone likes, you're probably not doing good projects, because they're not challenging people, they're not unexpected. Some of our most historically successful projects as an organization that are really held as turning points, like celebrated moments. The best work we ever did were hated in the time that they were created. And so I think there's a few different obligations. The way we work is we're in conversation with a lot of different artists simultaneously. We kick around ideas with them, and then sometimes things coalesce, and it's that moment where everything falls into place and we say, let's go. This is the right time. This is the right place. Sometimes artists come with full-baked ideas that really speak to us, and we run with that. There are countless ways that it happens. There's no formula, there's no checklist, there's no printable process. It's something that's very intimate and individual in the way that it's done. And what we do is we look at what are the pressing issues of the now? What do we feel like needs to be addressed? And who are these artists that are doing it in an authentic way? It's not that we decide, land rematriation is the topic of the now, which is really what the project The World's Unfair that was being referenced addressed with New Red Order, curated by Dia. It was that she had been working with New Red Order, and this project came together at the right time. So there's also a sense of serendipity that happens in that work.
Yeah.
The online question is from someone called Sedna Ali, and she says to Justine, a work or exhibit somewhere can be radically different elsewhere. How does curating the same show to shifting audiences, geographies factor into that kind of decision making?
Yeah. And I think that's expressly the point. It's not the same show. So often it's working with the same artist to create a radically different exhibition that's addressing the context in a different way. I am an institutional curator because I like being rooted in a public, in a specific community, and sort of serving that space of articulating the needs of the public and making sure that the artist is really rooted in what's happening there. And so that's something that I really take into consideration when doing these shows. And so what's interesting is a project like Paula Peavy's exhibition, it was supposed to be a touring show. But then when it went to the BAS, Paula and I were like, we cannot do the same exhibition in both of these places at all. It simply does not make sense in this context. And so that's how something radically different came about. And I have to say, I have profound gratitude for the institutions that I've worked at and worked with that are willing to go that way. And the shows have different titles, radically different texts. Sometimes there's a few overlapping works, but often it's essentially something entirely new.
Other questions from the audience? Participants.
I'll ask a question. So as you were going through your works from Shilpa Gupta's piece to where you are right now, there's a sort of journey through different approaches to performance art, art that is activist, political. Do you see, and also art that disrupts the day-to-day in many situations. So in your curatorial practice, do you see a difference between visual art, performance art, as well as like performance, or are they all sort of in this same like Venn diagram that like moves around for you?
I think there's a fluidity and a porosity between all those titles, and I really struggle with them. I often think in terms of like visual culture more broadly, and I like the fact that there can be that blurring and that confusion. I think that is more authentic to the way that we exist as humans and as artists, and as the idea that we're labeling ourselves as anything is confusing in and of itself. And I think work, especially within the contemporary context, should have the right to transform and exist within all these spaces. There's a work that if it's in a gallery, it's a piece of performance art. And if it's on a stage in a theater, that exact same work is a piece of theater. And so I think that is a right that the work has in and of itself.
More online questions. Oh, you have, let's take more.
Hi, Justine. This is Leena Kejriwal. I wanted to know if all the projects which you've done, even before Creative Time, you're already working in the public space. So which of all the projects for you was the most powerful public project, and why?
That I've worked on, or it's like choosing between my children, that kind of question. It's really difficult. It actually depends on the day in many ways. You know, I find that really challenging to answer because they're all valuable and meaningful. Shilpa's project was really grounding for me, and working with her was transformational in my life, like profoundly. And so, you know, so being back in India right now, you know, I'm thinking about that at the same time. So I think that's what I would refer to right now.
She sends you hugs, by the way.
Balloons. I do want to read out just before Priyanka.
No, but let him read.
No, I wanted to just from your description and your mission. It says our work is guided by 3 core values at Creative Time. Art matters, artists' voices are important in shaping society, and public spaces are places for creative and free expression. And I want to put pressure on that last bit to think also about how public spaces are constantly, I mean, there is the creation of public space in itself a kind of antagonistic act of negotiation and exercises of various kinds of agency and power. So that's a question, and kind of, I'm going to let other questions from the room filter in, but perhaps that's something that we want to keep asking ourselves, because there is a real urgency and I think a desire for many of us to work in public space, but the problematics of that and the kind of ways in which it is constantly something that has to be negotiated and not a given in any way destabilizes us, perhaps productively, but also sometimes in a way that tanks our ability to do something that
I wholeheartedly agree. It's something that I struggle with as well, even the terminology as you read it.
Yeah.
You know, that's something that I'm very mindful of. It's also something that's constantly shifting and that we need to negotiate and renegotiate. And public space, there are a lot of different public spaces. There's the town square, but there's also digital space, which is now public space in a lot of ways. And so I think we need to acknowledge the different strategies that we need to take in terms of expression in those different environments. And that negotiation, that tension is something that we grapple with on a daily basis at Creative Time.
Yeah. There's a question back there. And a couple online, but we'll take one from the room and then we'll, thank you.
Hello, I'm Priyanka. I just wanted to tell you I loved your presentation and all the projects that you talked about. It had so much of life in it. I mean, you were really invested in it. I could understand. My question is a bit, a logistical thing, like in respect to that project tender that you did with Jill. So these pennies, I mean, like it's written there, like the body is already so fragile, and during the COVID pandemic, I mean, how did you manage to cash it in the public? Because like here, if we have like a note and if even like a number is written, like they'll just give it back to you, or you have to go to the bank to get it changed. And look, so like, just what were the experiences that you had while, like cashing it into the public, and like what was the experiences, the dialogue? Because I felt like that is a very integral part to the work, right?
Yeah, so I absolutely love this. So a big part of my work is I feel like I'm always collaborating with lawyers. There are these like two really weird aspects of my life. If I talk to like young Justine and been like, you're gonna be dealing with finance and lawyers all the time. Have fun being a curator. I'd be like, this is really crazy, no way. But the reality is we spend a lot of time engaging with lawyers. Thank you to our pro bono legal team that allows us to do this kind of work. But what's so interesting is it's actually not illegal, what we did, on pennies. And there's a few reasons. First of all, it's a semantic issue. It is not defacement because we are not touching the faces. It is on the edges. So it's this really funny language loophole. And then the other thing is in the United States, there are these machines at tourist sites that press pennies. And there were legal cases about it. So we have a legal precedent that allows us to use pennies and do strange things to them. So what is also bizarre is the material of a penny is worth more than a cent. And so there's these weird sort of gray areas that happen specifically around that one piece of currency. So no one said a thing.
Amazing. Could we get the mic back, please? Thank you.
Can I ask both the online?
Yeah, if you'd ask them together. Priyanka, here's the mic. Thank you. Yeah. I think it takes a second.
Priya Chauhan asks online, the good old question we all grapple with, mapping impact, not just for justification, but for reasoning and decision making going forward.
Yep.
What have they, I think she means creative time, learned through the processes over time? And can I ask you another question online?
Yeah.
Cheryl Sahani says, what's the one lesson you learned early on about leading artists that you wish you had known sooner when you started as Creative Time?
Okay. The first question about how we measure impact, there's a nice drone going on there. Perfect. So, that is a challenge that we face with the arts, that often in the United States specifically, we talk about like economic impact of the arts. That's often the narrative that we have around impact, and that's a real like struggle because there's often with support this notion of like return on investment, which is really hard within the art space. So often we look at anecdotal and individual sort of response. Sometimes we look at direct sort of learning that came from the piece. I really want to shout out the World's Unfair project, which I'm not speaking about because this was something that was really driven by Diavij and the team. But there were people that learned about the realities of land repatriation and started going through steps to do it specifically from that project. I mean, that is very real impact. That's very measurable and tangible. And so what impact is has to be radically different for every single project that we take on. And that's a real challenge, I think, as an organization. Then in terms of something that I wish I had known earlier in my career, don't suffer assholes, maybe. I think like really that we're human beings, that kindness, tenderness, space for understanding is something that you really should prioritize, and level setting that with your collaborators early on is something that's really important. I think when I was young, I had this notion of I have to pay my dues, and sometimes I accepted behaviors that really were unacceptable. And I wish I had known that from go, that I could have level set things and said, we're collaborators. Let's look at each other in the eye, acknowledge each other's humanity, our challenges, our shortcomings, and work towards our shared goal. And done that instead of accepted certain things that I did earlier on.
On that note,
Tea time. Thank you.
let's have some tea. Thank you so much, Justine. Thank you.